now, don't try it at home. Do 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 do, hey now, don't try it. Don't you dare try it. You might die if you do this at home. Oh, it's the bridge, whoa. Don't try it. Can you almost believe it's been like 2 years since Unisonus? That is crazy. If you know, you know. You know. On this week's episode, we are traveling to Balosar in the core world, where we will discuss totally not space drugs, strange evolutionary timelines, and the most evasive planet in Star Wars history. On with the show. Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to Lady Qi'ra's Galactic Adventure, where we traverse the universe in our Correlian Corvette Cruiser, the Vindicator. I am, of course, your host on this excursion, Admiral Qi'ra of the Alliance to Restore the Republic. This week, we are continuing our exploration of the interior as we travel to the planet Balosar. If you have no questions, comments, or concerns about your stay, feel free to remember to prep your tissues and your screaming voice for when Ahsoka drops this summer, to start your Rebels rewatch in preparation for the event, and to constantly thank God King Dave Filoni and for all the sweet characterization he gives us in every project he works on. This week on Lady Qi'ra's Galactic Adventure. If you have been around the metaphorical block before, you know that we first start with the generally undescriptive planetary Disney canon and then move on to the legend stuff, if relevant, later. So let's get into this. In canon, Balosar was a ruined planet located at L12 in the Galactic grid and home to the Balosar species. Let's firstly get into the species, because there's going to be a lot of talk about environmental degradation later, which is exhausting enough. The Balosar are near-human peoples that would pass entirely as human if it were not for the, quote, antenna palps, end quote, on their heads. I know exactly what you're thinking. What the criff are antenna palps? I said exactly the same thing, very loudly, to myself. They are regarded as, quote, twin sensory appendages that sprouted from the top of a Balosar's head, end quote, which makes me blech. Y'all remember that scene in Attack of the Clones when Obi-Wan walks into the bar looking for the changeling and the guy tries to sell him death sticks? Well, that guy, named Elon Slays Bogano, is a Balosar. Back to the planet, though, if there is one thing that Balosar is known for, it's drugs. Just hold on, I'll explain. There's a mushroom on the planet called the Balo mushroom, which is literally regarded as a narcotic. But they aren't used like that. In some strange process I don't want to know about, they take the Balo mushrooms and turn them into a substance called Qi'ra, which is the primary ingredient in death sticks, to tie it back to the guy from the bar, good old Elon, who tried to sell those death sticks to good old A1. Qi'ra isn't just used in death sticks, but also in interrogation drugs, which I want to know even less about. Star Wars is for kids, friends. When I was a kid, I watched Hondo Ohnaka roofie his entire pirate crew and 2 Jedi. Fun. As you could probably assume based on the discussion so far, there's a lot of industry here. There is so much, in fact, the surface of the planet is covered in factories, but the pollution created by them being so bad and unregulated that you couldn't see a single star in the sky, except for maybe their own sun. The owners of these factories and Balosari corporations were known to sabotage each other with moles and spies and just friendly capitalistic competition. As is true in most capitalistic nations, the corporations took all of the money, swaying the poverty line and making the majority of the population live underneath of it. During the Galactic Civil War, many Balosari allied themselves with the rebels to try and alleviate the chokehold Empire-influenced corporations had on the planet. The success of this I am sadly unsure of, but this is hitting a little too close to home for me. I'm from America, and in America, that is exactly the kind of situation the average American is living under, and yes, the oppressive imperial body, and all. It's honestly horrendous, and kind of unlovable. That's all I got in canon, though, on Balosar. Let's all grab those legends lenses, wow, from under our seats, so we can learn a bit more about this place. Just like our coverage of Duro, the legends of Balosar get a bit darker and, how do I say, more realistic than the canon. So let's get into it. Balosar was once a terrestrial planet located at L12 in the Galactic grid. I said it was once a terrestrial planet, as Balosar is now heavily polluted due to over-industrialization. Balosar was so polluted that the light could not physically penetrate through the polluted atmosphere and reach the surface. To combat this, the locals would build towers as high as possible, trying to grab a glimpse of sunlight. As you can probably guess, since the world was so thoroughly polluted, the air quality was at an all-time low here, and not the band. I'm talking about Beijing levels of bad, but planet wide. As in, the atmospheres here were barely breathable. If visitors from another world were to visit, they'd need specialized air filters to breathe, maybe even environment suits. I know you're probably wondering, what about the natives? Well, this is Star Wars, where everything is fantastical and takes place over periods of thousands of years. I say this because human evolution is known to take thousands, even millions of years for us to get to the point where we are today. Right? The native Balosar have also evolved to fit their environment, developing ways to filter toxins from the air out of their bloodstream. I'm not exactly how, but I'm not sure I want to know. Human bodies are gross enough, frankly. Now, you're probably thinking, why did you make such a big deal about time and evolution for such a simple answer? That's because the majority of the Star Wars story, as we know it, takes place in about 30,000 years of history, right? The Galactic Republic was formed 25,053 BBY, the Jedi Order around the same time, the Sith Wars occurred in the late 4000s, early 3000s BBY, and the Empire takes over in 19 BBY. It's a long time. Yes, but not evolutionary what humans are used to, per se. But, what could have taken humans about 1 million years to evolve could have taken the Balosari 10,000. Aliens are weird. Do y'all remember those weird mushrooms from before, the Balo mushrooms? Yeah, the ones that death sticks are made from. Well, I was wondering at first, how is it possible for one planet to account for the entirety of the Death Sticks trade, and here's the answer. There were swaths of natural caves here on Balosar, not caused by pollution, which provided shelter and moisture for the mushrooms to grow, shielded from the pollution of the surface, and in large enough quantities for them to be farmed and turned into drugs. Every planet and its people will have to make a living somehow, I guess. On that joyful note, it's time for everyone's favorite segment, Dudes and Dudettes. It's history time. Balosar was first discovered by the Republic during the Great Manifest period, sometime between 20,000 and 17,018 BBY. This was a time of great exploration into the previous expansion regions as well as the Slice, and was ended by you guessed it, the Alcicon conflicts. For more information on Alcicon and the Alcicon conflicts, please go check out my episode on them entitled, quote, Alcicon has a lot of conflicts, end quote, where the only thing I learned is that Alcicon and Coruscant need couples therapy, and Corellia is a menace. During said conflicts, Balosar was consumed by Corellia's menaceness, which is formerly called the Corellia hegemony, I think is how you say it. I didn't know it in that episode either. Corellia was not taking sides during the conflict, though, but was selling ships to both and staking their own claims on the Slice. If you listen to the episode, it will make a lot more sense. Balosar was able to avoid much of the intergalactic conflict simply because they were struggling with corruption and degradation on their home front. As industry increased, the regulations surrounding pollution were decimated in favor of corporate interest. Sounds familiar. More and more corporations opened up shop here on Balosar, offering low wages to locals and pretty hefty sums for company heads. This attracted much attention from relief groups, but they were relatively unsuccessful in getting any sort of change to occur in the world. Eventually, perhaps due to buying stocks on margin, the economy of the planet began to fail, and the first thing to go was education. You can't have your populace becoming educated enough to find solutions to the oppression the government has caused them, right? As their livelihoods began to fade, many on Balosar did the one thing they could do, resort to criminal activity in the form of death sticks. We already talked about it before, but one thing I find interesting about the death stick production on Balosar is that the factories there that made these were government funded. Even the politicians were desperate for cash, which is saying a lot. When the death sticks entered the market, the Balosari immediately were in pretty severe competition with Ryloth. Why Ryloth, you might be wondering? Well, surprisingly, a large amount of Ryle spice, which is just a type of spice, which spice is a generic drug that's totally not ripped up from Dune, was processed on Ryloth. Let's move on from the spice talk, though. It wouldn't be an episode of this show without a strange war no one has heard of that I haven't researched, would it? No, of course it wouldn't. This time we have two, the Great Galactic War and the Cold War, both of which involve the Sith. During the latter, the Sith had made an outpost in orbit of Balosar for more direct attacks on the Republic, which of course resulted in a mega epic battle that we aren't covering. I also learned of a governmental body in Star Wars that I've literally never heard of before, the Eternal Empire. I don't know about you, but I'm putting it on my list. It sounds kind of dope, and no, not that kind. We are going to move forward from undisclosed Sith Wars, but not these Sith Wars, because those are different, and move forward into the Clone Wars period. Cue the intro music, but it's just me, and it's bad because I'm literally just making weird noises. I don't care enough. Balosar started the war on the Republic side of the battle, protected by the 20th Sector Army. Although it doesn't seem like the planet itself is worth much, let's all remember that many of the senators and just general business people on Coruscant were benefiting from the death stick trade, just like real-life politicians and business people benefit from real-world drug trades in exchange for votes. Well, if you're ever bored, look up the presidential history of Mexico and the sheer amount of payouts that occur, or look up Nigeria and the corruption there. I studied it in high school for a whole year, and there's a wealth of information that no one ever talks about. Don't think that doesn't happen in America too, though, because it most certainly does. To my knowledge, there weren't any major battles in the Balosar system during the Clone Wars period, nor were there during the Empire either. Interestingly, Balosar was forced to pledge their alliance to the Emperor and his empire, but miraculously were able to avoid any conflict during the Galactic Civil War, which is the war that is from the original trilogy, if you didn't know. When I started this show, it threw me for a loop too. There's a lot of terminology and lore added later that makes the lore from the original trilogies and the original movies themselves feel really isolated from each other sometimes. When the New Republic rose to power, Balosar refused to side with either the New Republic or the Imperial remnants, vowing to remain neutral and under their own control, but that didn't end up working out for them. Air pollution during this time had risen to an all-time high, killing all of the Balo mushrooms previously protected in the caves beneath the surface, and without the mushrooms, there was no Balosar economy. With nowhere else to turn, the Balosar sided with their market enemies, the Twi'leks, whose royal spice had risen to an all-time high, creating a monopoly for them and their trade. By joining the Twi'leks, the Balosar were able to avoid the Yuuzhan Vong. Knock knock, it's the... Wait, there's no one here. Maybe next week. And on that note, we're done here. And that's just about everything I have for you on Balosar in canon and legends. I hope you enjoyed your journey this week and your stay so far aboard the Vindicator. If you have any questions or concerns about your stay, feel free to bring it up with one of our personnel on board via a private message or a DM, perhaps on our TikTok accounts at Shadow Collective Rules or at Unidentified Robot, or maybe our new Twitter, however long that's gonna last, at twitter.com/lady__Qi'ra, or perhaps with a review of our show on Apple Podcasts, or perhaps if you want more of me, I don't know why you would, but you can head on over to patreon.com/OneLadyQueera Productions, where for only $5 a month you can access tons of additional content in our exclusive Discord community. All of those usernames and their respective platforms will be listed in the show notes. Next time we will be journeying to Hosnian Prime, and whatever core worlds I can cover in 30 minutes or less. Until next time, my friends, companions, and droids, may the Force be with you all. Next week we will be covering the song High Infidelity from Taylor Swift's 10th studio album, Midnight, and the connection, and the Han and Qi'ra connection, but not me. Not me, Qi'ra. Other Qi'ra. You get it. Han is so dramatic. I'll see you then.